It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, over the last day or so, we've been corresponding, and Al and I and you have been interested in the Alsobrook race in Maryland. And surprise, surprise, after the Democratic convention, she's up 5 points against Larry Hogan. That was the opposite of what it was 2 weeks ago. I'm particularly interested in this idea of, do you feel like coattails are still relevant these days?
I think it still matters, and I think coattails exist from the standpoint that what happens at the top of a ticket in a national election is very important throughout the ballot. Start though with this notion that, and ask, how can Trump help or hurt? But he helped in the primary process by keeping, in Republican primaries, by keeping either people out because he threw his support behind his own candidate. It didn't always work that well, but that's a role he played, and he helped. There was the sense that he was going to help with money. Then he ran into the legal problems, and so the money isn't, I believe, as plentiful as people thought. He's spending a lot of it on his legal bills. He's behind Kamala Harris in fundraising himself. So you're beginning, we're hearing that the Republican Senatorial Committee, Republican House, on the House side, those committees are behind Democrats in fundraising. And I think that's in part because of what's happening at the top of the ticket, where there's just growing concern about Trump's candidacy. The thing we don't know that I think, and I've said this before, is critically important is voter turnout. And so the question of whether the person at the top of the ticket can really bring their voters out to vote, and presumably if they voted for a Republican, they're going to go down the ballot and vote for other Republicans. I've consistently been doubtful that when we get to November 5th, only 61 days away, that Trump is going to be the kind of person at the top of the ticket who's going to drive high numbers of Republicans out to vote. He'll drive his supporters out to vote, but he may drive now, as we've seen this week with former Vice President Pence and now Liz Cheney, he may drive Republicans out to vote for Kamala Harris, but he's not going to be, in my view, the person that would motivate those voters. And so, to your question, you look at a place like Maryland, where not that long ago Hogan was neck and neck with Alsobrooks and Hogan. And Hogan is probably the perfect Republican candidate in Maryland because he's won statewide, but he's won in non-presidential election years. And so this was going to be different from the beginning. I think Al and I both felt that the Democrat was, had to be favored ultimately, but now we're seeing those numbers change. But for her, in favor of Alsobrooks. P.S. I don't think it was because of the quality of her speech, not that I thought her speech was bad at the convention. I think this is part of this whole Kamala Harris factor in the election. The other thing I'd say, and that is that that they chart what voters where voters are, whether they prefer a Republican leadership of Congress or a Democratic leadership in Congress. And I found the statistic interesting that about a year ago, October 1st, Republicans actually had a percentage lead on that index of about 2.8%. Now, it fluctuates up and down, but usually it fluctuates about a point, maybe half a point, back and forth. Well, today, or yesterday, in the polling reported on 5/28, the Democrats were favored by 2.5%. And that uptick has occurred from about an even position just a month or so ago. That's occurred since the Kamala Harris phenomenon. And so it seems to me, and Al's better than I am at tracking these races, but it seems to me anywhere you had a close race, I saw an article about California, 5 close congressional races, all of them now in play. because of the strength of the top of the ticket for Democrats. I think we're going to see that over and over again. And as we said before, I don't see what Trump does in the next 61 days that makes him more attractive as a candidate. And if the trends continue, I think some of these close races will tend to tilt Democrat.
Al, the question, same question to you.
Well, it used to be that the way you voted a straight ticket is you had a voting machine and you pulled the lever for your party, and in order to vote for an individual of the other party, you had to pull up the particular lever for that candidate and pull it down. So it was a very complicated process, and that's where we got this idea of straight ticketing. I think that straight ticketing in the new modern era has really been replaced by partisan polarization. Actually, there's more of what we would used to call straight ticketing. In other words, down ballot following the presidential now than there has been in a long time. But it's not because you're pulling one lever and pulling a straight ticket. It's because, you're either a Democrat or a Republican. Now think about this. I might be wrong by one or two, but because I just went through this very quickly last night. But I think right now in the United States Senate, there are only 5 split delegations. So, and only 5 senators who are of the party other than the party which last won the presidential election in their state. Think about that. 95 of the senators are the same party as the candidate who won for president. They're Joe Manchin, and that'll make it 4 because he's not running, and the governor's going to win in West Virginia. There's John Tester and Sherrod Brown, Democrats, in Montana and Ohio. Tester right now is running a little bit behind. Sherrod's running a little bit ahead. But, so one or two of those, that's possible both of them could win. But basically, they're anomalies. The only senator out of the 32 or 33 who ran in 2020, who was not of the party who won her state, was Susan Collins. So everybody else followed the presidential candidate, and that was in 2020. And in 2022, Ron Johnson in Wisconsin was the only candidate he's a Republican, and Biden had won his state in 2020. He's the only anomaly there. So Hogan has a big climb just if you think about national voting patterns. But then you look at Maryland. Maryland is one of the 5 most Democratic states in the country. I saw a piece yesterday that said, Biden won California by 5 million, New York by 2 million, Massachusetts, Maryland, Ohio, and Illinois by over 1 million votes. In the last time Maryland elected a Republican to the United States Senate was Mac Mathias, and I looked it up last night. I couldn't believe it because, he's one of my contemporaries, right? 1980 was the last time he was elected, and Democratic senators ever since. So, and as Craig said, Hogan won his elections for governor in non-presidential years. So the answer is, I think that the polarization has sort of replaced the straight ticketing, but you get the same result. In fact, you get a stronger result. And I think it's very hard for Hogan. The same poll that had Alsobrook up by 5 points had Harris up, I think, by 25. And that's a pretty big burden for Hogan to overcome. And the other thing that I think happened, in our area, we really don't get a lot of these ads because not particularly competitive. But Alsobrook also went on the air with, I think, a very good ad, which has about 5 or 6 quotes from Hogan saying that he's a Republican and he's going to organize with the Republicans, and gets to the question Craig raised about control of the Senate. And I think that's one of the best arguments that Alsobrook has. So we've talked about this for a while, but I suspect that Alsobrook will win comfortably. Also, Maryland's a very diverse state, and that will be reflected in the vote as well.
Craig, you were saying, you were making the comment that both Vice President Pence and now Lynn Cheney have endorsed Harris. There's a lot of speculation that George W. Bush might make an announcement, and it makes me think that this could be a whole series of strategic announcements of Republicans lining up.
Liz Cheney and Pence are two important endorsements, to be sure, and we're 61 days out. Those two do give permission in a sense. They give comfort to those who have been opposed to Trump but been reluctant to say anything. And so I'm sure you're going to see more. But to me, at least as compelling, if not more compelling, is the statistic that 42 of the 44 Trump cabinet members, I didn't even know he went through 44 cabinet members in his 4 years, but he did. 42 of them have said publicly they will not support Trump. Imagine that. I have to be honest with you, in 1988, George Bush would not have had a campaign if 90% of the Reagan cabinet members said they couldn't support him. And I think probably Al Gore wouldn't have had a campaign if the Clinton cabinet said they wouldn't support him. This is just like phenomenal. And it's coming at a time when another statistic, 15% of the voters in these swing states are supposedly undecided. And I have to think that has an impact. I don't know about former President George Bush. He has been reluctant to step into these contests, and I don't blame him for that at all. But I do think the people around him, people, really the key thing is what's going to happen in these swing states. And I think if people in some of these swing states, Republicans, start to flip, that's going to send a real message. It's just, the survey again said that you're now seeing swing state voters saying that Trump's too extreme. That's bad, but over 50%. But close to 50% say he's a threat to the country. And so you might say, well, okay, well, how about Kamala Harris? Well, she's down in the mid 30% or 40%, people obviously voting against her, that say she's a threat. But Republicans are seeing Trump as a threat to the country. So if the campaign's doing what I suspect they're doing, this is going to be torture by drip. Day after day after day, there's going to be somebody else who comes along, and I'm sure it's driving Donald Trump a little bit nuts, and it's all leading in, of course, to this debate next week, where the more pressure he's under, the more people get under his skin, the more likely we are to see some real theatrics next Tuesday.
Al, you have the last word this week.
I think that the Cheney and Pence endorsements and Adam Kinzinger and all of the cabinet people who said they can't vote for Bush or for Trump will help somewhat. But what it really does is it shows that there's no old Republican Party. The Republican Party of Ronald Reagan and Craig Fuller and George H.W. Bush and all of my friends. Somebody sent me a picture of an event I did with Rich Bond, the Republican chairman, when we used to do a dog and pony show during the 2000 campaign. All of my friends on the Republican side, they aren't in that party anymore.
Yeah.
I've referred before to Tim Alberta's piece in Atlantic about the Republican Party and about the Trump campaign that was done before Biden got out, when the whole campaign was focused on Biden. But the key thing about it was that they weren't looking for Republican voters, normal Republican voters. They thought there are a bunch of hidden Trumpers who very rarely vote, but Trump can get them out, and that was their get out the vote strategy. Now, I think that at the margins and hopefully in some of the suburban areas, particularly somebody like Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger will help a little bit. I'm not sure how much Pence will help, because he's really an evangelical Republican, and maybe that base will start to get soft. But if it does, it'll be because of Trump can't decide how to deal with abortion. I mean, talk about getting hoisted on your own petard. He bragging about getting rid of Roe versus Wade, and all of a sudden he figured out that 70% of the people are against him. And so he's spinning like a top. He goes after, all these so-called flip-flops of Kamala Harris, where she made one statement in the middle of a primary, and he's switching his position on abortion every day. I mean, I think they're going to have about 35 ballots on that, give him 35 ballots on that Florida abortion initiative, so he can mark yes, no, yes, no, yes, no every day. So I think it all helps Harris a little bit, but somehow Trump, no matter what happens, I mean, the thing that has struck me about this race is Harris has come back. Biden was completely out of it, had no chance of winning. Harris has come back, probably has a little lead in the national race, but pretty close in certainly margin of error in the swing states. And if the voting records from 2020 and 2016 follow patterns, Trump does better in the actual vote than he does in the polls. So it still makes me pretty nervous. But the point is that Harris, the reason this race is tightened is not because Trump has fallen. Trump actually has gained a point or so, but he's got this base, and it's 46 to 47%. He's the vote he got in 2020. Got a little bit bigger in 2020, in 2016. He got a little bit bigger in 2020, but it was always between 46 and 47. That's where he is. And the challenge, Harris has picked up. So. Which means that the strategy for Trump for the rest of the campaign is going to be completely negative. They've got to destroy Harris so she can't even get basically drive her turnout away. Craig, I was thinking about this race just to conclude, and some of our critics sometimes say that we talk too much in nostalgia, but that's what we are, right? That's us. What can we do, right? but I think there's some similarities in terms of the pattern of the vote to 1980, and here's why. And I don't mean this in character-wise, but I mean it in vote-wise. Trump is Jimmy Carter. When I was in the Carter White House, by the middle of 1979, I decided the people didn't want Carter to be president. And I think a majority of the people don't want Trump to be president. But they needed an acceptable alternative. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but there are all these questions about Reagan, whether he was up to the job. He's the oldest guy ever to run at that time, even though he's in his late 60s, early 70s. He was a grade B actor, and could he really do it, all that. Well, after that debate, he showed that he was up to the job, made people comfortable with him, and Carter dropped 10 points overnight. Yeah. So I think there could be a precipitating incident in this race like there was in 1980, which could change this from a tight race to a landslide. Of course, it's also possible that that won't happen, but I do think that's a pattern we might want to look at.
Well, we have to leave it there. A programming note, Fromm and Fuller will be back on Wednesday after the debate between the presidential candidates. But in the meantime, Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.